Pluto was 71 years old, a retired carpenter whose hands still carried the memory of decades shaping wood. He had always been a man of quiet strength, known in his neighborhood for fixing a broken chair or carving toys for the children next door. His life moved at a gentle rhythm now, morning walks around the block, a small vegetable garden in the backyard, evenings spent with his wife watching the sunset. Yet lately, that rhythm had been broken. What started as a dull ache in his chest after meals grew into a gnawing worry he couldn't ignore. One night, the pain pressed down so heavily he had to sit at the edge of his bed, clutching his shirt, whispering to his wife that something didn't feel right. The next morning, Pluto found himself in a sterile clinic room, listening as the doctor leaned forward with a seriousness that made his stomach twist. "Your heart is under strain," the doctor said gently, "and we need to talk about what you've been eating." Pluto blinked in disbelief. He hadn't thought much about his diet. After all, garlic was something he had eaten for years. His wife had always believed it was nature's strongest medicine, but the doctor's words cut through that comfort. "Garlic can heal," the doctor continued, "but it can also harm if used the wrong way. And right now, the way you're eating it may be working against you, not for you." That moment stayed with him. He remembered the confusion in his wife's eyes, the quiet fear in her trembling hands as she clutched her purse. How could something as ordinary as garlic, a food they had trusted all their lives, suddenly turn into a risk? It felt almost like a betrayal, an invisible trap laid in his very own kitchen. Pluto thought about the evenings when he spread crushed garlic on bread, about the soups he laced with clove after clove. He never measured, never questioned. More always seemed better. Yet the doctor's warning echoed louder. Be careful, or you may be risking more than you know. As he walked out of that clinic, the city streets looked different to him, harsher, filled with reminders of how fragile a body could be after 70. Every step felt heavier with questions. Was he making mistakes that had slowly, silently been wearing down his health? Had his effort to stay strong actually placed him in danger? He thought of his father, who had passed suddenly in his 60s, and for the first time, Pluto felt the same shadow lingering over his own life. It was no longer about superstition or habit, it was about survival. That night, unable to sleep, he sat at his kitchen table with a single garlic bulb in his hand, turning it over as though it might answer his questions. It struck him how something so small could hold such power, able to mend or to break, depending on the choices he made. He realized then that his journey had to change, not just for himself, but for his wife, his children, his grandchildren who still came running through the garden every weekend. He would need to relearn the food he thought he knew so well, to respect it as medicine, not just seasoning. And so Pluto's story began with that quiet shift, from a man who trusted blindly to one who began to see that even the simplest things could carry hidden risks. His heart, his life, his future, everything rested on the small but powerful changes he was now ready to make. Pluto had always believed garlic was a gift from the earth, a humble clove capable of warding off illness and strengthening the body. His wife often reminded him of how their parents swore by it, rubbing it on bread, simmering it in broth, even chewing it raw when the winter cold circled through the village. To him, it was never just seasoning, it was tradition, almost sacred, passed from one generation to the next. But traditions have a way of hiding their own shadows, and Pluto's body began to show him something he didn't expect. It began with nights of restless sleep. He would shift in bed, pressing a palm against his chest, trying to steady a racing heart that seemed to beat louder in the silence. His wife would wake and whisper, "Is it the same pain again?" He nodded but brushed it off, unwilling to admit the fear building inside him. In his mind, garlic was supposed to protect, not harm, and yet, the more he used it, whole cloves in his stew, raw slices with his morning bread, the heavier his chest felt. One morning, after a particularly long night of gasping and sitting upright to catch his breath, he agreed to see the doctor. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic, its walls lined with quiet reminders that health was more fragile than pride. The doctor, a man with kind but steady eyes, listened as Pluto described his habits. Garlic daily, sometimes raw, often more than a handful of cloves, especially when he felt he needed strength. The doctor sighed, folded his hands, and spoke in a tone that was gentle but firm. "Pluto, garlic has power, but power cuts both ways. The way you're using it may be thinning your blood too much. That's why you're feeling weak, dizzy, restless at night." The words fell heavily. Thin blood? Pluto thought garlic was helping his heart, not straining it. He looked at his wife, who sat beside him, gripping her handbag, her knuckles pale. She had always encouraged him, sometimes even teased him when he ate clove after clove. More garlic, more strength, she would say. And now the truth pressed between them, uncomfortable and sharp. Too much of the very thing he trusted was quietly undermining him. That night, back at the kitchen table, he looked at the basket of garlic bulbs resting by the window. They seemed ordinary, harmless. How could something so small be capable of turning against him? His wife poured tea and said softly, "Maybe we need to learn again. Maybe garlic isn't just food, maybe it's medicine, and we must respect it like medicine." Pluto nodded, the steam from the cup rising between them like a veil lifting from old beliefs. For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility, not just for himself, but for the family who needed him whole. This was the first awakening. Not a rejection of garlic, but a realization that even trusted traditions can carry hidden dangers. His chest pains, his dizziness, his nights of uneasy sleep were no longer mysterious. They were a warning, and warnings, when heard in time, can become turning points. For Pluto, this was the beginning of a different path, where every clove he touched would remind him that health was not about blind faith, but about balance, awareness, and the courage to change. A week after that clinic visit, Pluto found himself surrounded by the warmth of his family. His children had come over for Sunday dinner, their laughter filling the house, the smell of roasted chicken and herbs drifting from the oven. His wife had set the table with care, slipping garlic bread into the oven at the last minute, just as she always did. The grandchildren darted between the chairs, chasing one another in a blur of giggles and tiny feet. For a moment, Pluto forgot the heaviness of the doctor's words and let himself sink into the comfort of family. When the meal began, his daughter passed him the basket of golden, buttery garlic bread. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the slice. For decades, it had been his favorite, the crisp crust breaking under his teeth, the soft inside rich with flavor. But the doctor's warning returned, too much garlic, thinning the blood. He told himself one slice couldn't hurt. He took it, savoring the first bite, trying to push the thought aside. Yet halfway through the meal, something shifted. A dull throb began at the back of his head, spreading forward, pressing against his temples. He put down his fork, trying to hide his discomfort. His wife noticed first, her eyes narrowing. "Pluto, are you all right?" she asked. He forced a smile. "Just a bit lightheaded." But his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water. His daughter, a nurse, caught the small tremor and her face tightened. "Dad, when was the last time you ate like this? With so much garlic?" The question sliced through the chatter of the table. The grandchildren paused, their laughter dimming into quiet concern. Pluto felt exposed, as though his private choices were now under a harsh light. He admitted softly, "I've been eating it almost every day, sometimes too much, I think." His daughter placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady but laced with worry. "Dad, garlic can be good, but it can also interfere with your blood, especially at your age. You need to be careful. You can't treat it like it's harmless." The room felt heavier after that. Dinner continued, but quieter, as if everyone was carrying the weight of what they'd just heard. Pluto chewed slowly, every bite reminding him of the invisible line between healing and harm. By the time the table was cleared, his headache had deepened into fatigue. He sat in his favorite chair by the window, watching the children play in the yard, and thought of the life still ahead of him. Would he live to see his grandchildren grow into adults, or was he letting small mistakes shorten the time he had left? That night, his wife spoke plainly. "Pluto, I don't want to lose you over something so small. Garlic is not the enemy, but we must learn its limits." Her voice broke slightly, the fear she carried finally spilling through. He took her hand, rough from years of homemaking, and squeezed it. "I didn't know," he whispered, "but I know now." It was not shame he felt, but awakening. A shift from ignorance to awareness, from trust in tradition, to a new respect for his body's fragility. For the first time, Pluto realized his choices weren't only about him. Every slice of garlic bread, every extra clove dropped into a stew, it all touched the people who loved him. His health was their stability, their comfort, their future memories. That night, as he lay awake listening to his wife's steady breathing, he made a quiet vow. He would change, not just to ease his own fears, but to give his family the peace they deserved. This was his second shift. The family dinner had become more than a meal. It was a mirror held up to his habits, forcing him to see the cost. Garlic was no longer just a flavor. It was a reminder that life, fragile and fleeting, demanded care in even the smallest choices. And Pluto was ready, perhaps for the first time in his life, to honor that truth. It had been months since Pluto first felt that crushing weight in his chest, and though he had grown more cautious, the worries hadn't fully left him. His family urged him to see the doctor again, this time for a scheduled checkup that included a minor dental procedure. To Pluto, it seemed harmless, just a tooth extraction, nothing more. He walked into the clinic with his usual quiet composure, though deep inside a nervousness stirred like a shadow that refused to leave. The waiting room hummed with soft chatter and the rustling of magazines. Pluto's wife sat beside him, her hand resting lightly over his. She squeezed it once, the way she always did when she felt his unease. "It'll be simple," she whispered. "You'll be home by evening." Pluto nodded, though his mind kept circling back to the garlic bread he had eaten only days before. He hadn't told the doctor, after all, garlic was food, wasn't it? Not medicine. Surely it couldn't matter. When his name was called, he followed the nurse into the white, sterile room. The dentist greeted him kindly, asked the usual questions, then paused. "Are you on any blood-thinning medications?" Pluto shook his head. "No medications, just garlic. I eat a fair amount of it." The dentist froze for a moment, lowering his pen. "Garlic?" he repeated, then set the chart aside. "Mr. Pluto, you need to understand something. Garlic isn't just food, it has blood-thinning properties. If you've eaten a lot recently, even something as simple as this tooth extraction could cause uncontrolled bleeding." The words hit harder than Pluto expected. His wife looked startled, her eyes flicking between the dentist and her husband. "But it's just garlic," she said softly, almost pleading. The dentist leaned closer, his tone steady but serious. "Garlic can be more powerful than aspirin for some people. I've seen patients bleed far longer than expected, some needing emergency care, just because they didn't mention garlic consumption before surgery. We may need to delay your procedure until we're sure it's safe." Pluto sat still, stunned. He thought of the countless cloves he had eaten, the stews simmering in his kitchen, the bread still warm with garlic butter. Could each of those simple pleasures really have put him this close to danger? The dentist continued, "If you want to protect yourself, stop garlic consumption at least 10 days before any procedure, dental, surgical, even small biopsies. Your safety depends on it." As they left the clinic, the afternoon light felt sharper, almost blinding. Pluto walked slowly, his wife at his side, her silence heavier than any words. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling. "I nearly lost you once already, and now this? All because we didn't know." He stopped, turning to face her. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I promise," he said quietly. "I'll never take it lightly again." That night, Pluto lay awake, the dentist's warning echoing in his ears. It wasn't just about garlic anymore, it was about the fragility of life, about how even the smallest things could open doors to danger when ignored. He thought of his grandchildren, their small hands tugging at his sleeve, their voices bright with innocence. He thought of his wife, who had spent decades at his side, now forced to carry a fear he had unknowingly created. This was his third shift. The casual clove of garlic, once so ordinary, had revealed itself as something potent, something to be respected like medicine. Pluto realized that every choice he made would ripple outward, touching not only his body but the hearts of those who loved him most. And with that realization, a new resolve settled deep within him, to live not in denial, but in awareness, honoring both the healing and the risk held in even the smallest of things. The morning sun had just begun to creep across Pluto's kitchen window when he shuffled in, still heavy with sleep. His wife was upstairs, and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. He reached for the basket of garlic on the counter, the cloves gleaming in their papery skins. For years, this had been his habit, a clove of raw garlic chewed quickly before breakfast, something he believed strengthened his heart and kept illness at bay. He had done it so often it felt like brushing his teeth, routine, unquestioned. That morning, though, something was different. He crushed the clove between his teeth, the sharp heat burning across his tongue, sliding down into his stomach like fire. At first it was nothing new, just the familiar sting. But within minutes, a searing pain shot through his belly, twisting and doubling him over. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, his breath shallow. It wasn't the gentle warmth of spice anymore. It was a stabbing ache, deep and merciless, like knives cutting through him from the inside. His wife rushed down the stairs at the sound of his groan. She found him hunched over, sweat beading on his forehead, his face ashen. "Pluto," she cried, rushing to his side. "Wow, what's happening?" He could barely answer. "Stomach burning," he gasped. Panic flashed across her eyes as she steadied him into a chair, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. He looked at her, his lips trembling, and whispered, "It was just garlic, just one clove." By the time they reached the doctor, the pain had dulled but left him weak, shaken. The doctor listened, nodding slowly as Pluto described his morning ritual. "Raw garlic on an empty stomach," the doctor said, his tone heavy with concern. "Pluto, that's too harsh, especially for someone your age. Those sulfur compounds can irritate the lining of your stomach. If you already have a sensitive gut, or worse, ulcers, it can make them bleed." Pluto's wife gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The doctor continued, "You must never do that again. Garlic can heal, yes, but raw on an empty stomach is like pouring acid onto fragile skin. It doesn't build strength, it causes harm." The words echoed inside Pluto's mind long after they left the clinic. He thought of the countless mornings he had followed this ritual, believing he was doing something noble for his body. The memory of the sharp pain, the way it brought him to his knees, was burned into him now. That night, as he sat in his chair by the window, the stars flickering faintly above the garden, he held a clove of garlic in his palm and studied it with new eyes. It was no longer just a friend. It was a force, capable of saving him, but also of breaking him if he forgot to treat it with care. His wife sat across from him, her hands folded tightly together. "Promise me," she said quietly, "that you'll never eat it like that again." He met her gaze and nodded, "I promise." The room felt still, almost sacred, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to mean it. And he did. For the first time, he understood that even good intentions could wound the body if not tempered with wisdom. This was Pluto's fourth shift. A single clove had shown him his own fragility, reminding him that strength doesn't come from reckless habits, but from gentle respect for the body's limits. He realized that health wasn't about proving toughness, it was about listening, noticing the whispers of pain before they turned into screams. From that morning forward, he would never look at garlic the same way. It had scarred him, but it had also opened his eyes. And sometimes, the path to healing begins with a lesson carved painfully deep. Pluto had always loved the sight of garlic bulbs resting by the kitchen window. Their papery skins caught the sunlight in soft shades of ivory and gold, and to him, they were a symbol of home, simple, honest, and always ready to flavor a meal. He would pull cloves from the basket whenever the urge struck, chop them finely, and often submerge them in oil to make a quick spread. It seemed harmless, even clever, a way to save time. One afternoon, as he prepared dinner, he reached for a small jar of garlic and oil that had been sitting on the counter for days. He unscrewed the lid and inhaled the faint aroma. Nothing smelled unusual, nothing looked spoiled. His wife glanced at him from across the kitchen and frowned. "How long has that been there, Pluto?" she asked. He shrugged. "A few days, maybe. Garlic never really goes bad." He spread it generously across bread, the golden oil soaking into the crust. That evening, after the meal, a wave of dizziness washed over him. His vision blurred for a moment, and his hands trembled as he tried to steady the glass of water in front of him. His wife, alarmed, urged him to sit down. The room felt heavy, the sounds muffled, his body weak. Fear rippled through her as she called their daughter, who insisted they go to the clinic immediately. At the clinic, the doctor listened carefully and asked a single question. "How was the garlic stored?" Pluto's answer, "In oil, on the counter," brought a look of concern to the doctor's face. "That's dangerous," the doctor explained gently. "Garlic in oil, left at room temperature, can grow a bacterium called botulinum. You can't see it, you can't smell it, but it produces a toxin that can cause blurred vision, muscle weakness, even paralysis. It's one of the most serious foodborne risks we know." The words sank like stones in Pluto's chest. He looked at his wife, who sat pale and silent, her hands gripping the strap of her handbag. He felt a deep shame for the carelessness, for assuming that something so ordinary could never turn against him. "I didn't know," he whispered. The doctor nodded with quiet understanding. "Many don't, but now you do. From this day on, refrigerate it. Or better yet, make a fresh batch each time. Your life is worth more than a shortcut in the kitchen." When they returned home, Pluto carried the small jar to the sink. He opened it one last time, staring at the glossy cloves glistening in their golden bath. He thought of how easily they could have betrayed him, how close he might have come to a fate worse than the chest pains or the stomach burns. Without another word, he emptied the jar down the drain, the oil swirling away like a quiet surrender. That night, he and his wife sat together in the quiet living room. She rested her head against his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't take things for granted anymore, even the foods we trust." Pluto nodded, his gaze fixed on the shadows stretching across the floor. "I see that now," he murmured. It was not just garlic he was thinking of, it was everything. The fragile line between safety and risk, the choices that seemed small but could alter everything. This was his fifth shift. From that evening forward, garlic was no longer a casual ingredient, tossed into jars or left on the counter without thought. It was a reminder of caution, a call to respect the unseen dangers that linger in ordinary habits. He understood now that survival wasn't just about medicine or miracles. Sometimes it was about listening to warnings, even the silent ones, and changing before it was too late. Winter had always made Pluto uneasy. The cold crept into his bones, stiffened his joints, and left him longing for strength. This year felt heavier than others. He caught himself tiring easily during walks, sometimes needing to sit down before reaching the end of the street. His wife noticed, her brows knitting tighter each day. "You need to take care," she said, pressing a scarf around his neck before he left the house. But Pluto had another idea, one he believed would make him stronger. Garlic. He remembered his father's words from years ago, spoken in their kitchen on a winter's night. "When you feel weak, eat more garlic. It will fight everything inside you." That memory lingered like a promise, one Pluto desperately wanted to believe. So one evening, when the house was quiet, he peeled clove after clove, 10, then 12, then 15, and swallowed them raw with gulps of water. The burn was fierce, but he told himself it was strength taking root. He imagined his blood growing cleaner, his heart steadier. At first, nothing seemed wrong. He went to bed with a strange pride, convinced he had taken charge of his health. But by morning, his body told a different story. He woke weak, his mouth dry, a strange metallic taste coating his tongue. When he tried to rise, his legs wavered beneath him. His wife rushed to his side as he collapsed back onto the bed. "Pluto, what have you done?" she cried, her voice breaking. He tried to answer, but could only whisper, "Garlic, too much." The hours that followed blurred into fear. He felt waves of nausea, his chest heavy, his skin pale. His wife called their daughter, who immediately insisted on rushing him to the hospital. There, under the cold lights, the doctor shook his head as Pluto admitted how much garlic he had eaten. 15 cloves in one night? Pluto, that is toxic. Garlic in small amounts can protect you, but in excess, it destroys your blood cells. It burns the lining of your stomach. It can shut down your organs. His wife clutched his hand tighter, tears pooling in her eyes. The doctor's words struck deeper than any pain. "More is not better," he continued, his tone heavy but kind. "Your body only needs 1 or 2 cloves a day. Beyond that, you're not giving it strength. You're poisoning it." Pluto turned his face away, ashamed. He had wanted so badly to be strong, to push back against the creeping weight of age, that he had blinded himself to reason. He saw the disappointment etched in his wife's face, the fear his children carried in their eyes. His choice had shaken not just his body, but the very foundation of trust his family placed in him. When he returned home, the garlic bulbs sat silently in their basket, as innocent as ever. Yet to Pluto, they looked different, no longer harmless, no longer symbols of tradition and strength. They were reminders of the night he nearly lost more than his pride. He sat by the window, looking out at the frost-covered garden, and thought about how fragile life had become. Strength, he realized, wasn't in how much he could force into his body. Strength was in restraint, in knowing when enough was enough. That evening, as his wife poured him a cup of warm tea, she placed her hand gently over his. "Promise me," she whispered, "that you'll never do that again." He met her gaze and nodded, his voice steady though quiet. Never again. And for the first time, he meant it with the full weight of his heart. This was Pluto's 6th shift, a lesson carved painfully into his body. That excess, even of something believed to be good, could be more dangerous than the illness he feared. From then on, every clove he ate would be measured, not by fear of weakness, but by respect for balance. He understood now that true strength was not in trying to fight death with more, but in living wisely with less. Pluto's life changed in ways he never expected, all because of something as small as a clove of garlic. What began as blind trust in an old family habit slowly unraveled into moments of fear, his chest tightening in the night, the near disaster at the dentist's chair, the burning pain of a morning ritual gone wrong. Each moment carved a lesson deeper into his heart, teaching him that even the simplest traditions can carry hidden risks if held too tightly. But through these struggles, something shifted. Pluto moved from stubbornness to awareness, from chasing strength through excess to finding peace and balance. He learned that garlic was not an enemy nor a savior, but a reminder to listen closely to the body and to treat health not with force, but with respect. In his transformation, his family found their own comfort, knowing that he was no longer driven by old myths, but by wisdom earned through experience. For those listening to his story, perhaps the lesson is not about garlic alone, but about the choices we make each day. The foods we trust, the routines we never question, the shortcuts we take without thought, all of them shape our future health more than we realize. Sometimes the greatest change begins not with medicine or miracles, but with a simple pause, a willingness to look at familiar things in a new way. And so, as Pluto sits now by his window, the garden stretching quietly before him, he carries not fear, but gratitude. Gratitude for the warnings that came in time, for the family who stood by him, and for the second chance to live wisely. His story is a reminder that even the smallest changes can open the door to a longer, gentler, more hopeful life.